Speed has always been a strange kind of promise. It lures us with numbers, sound, and the illusion of control, yet what it really sells is sensation. The thrill of acceleration, the intimacy of mechanics, the precise point where human skill meets engineering obsession. In the 1990s, that promise reached a fever pitch as lightweight, high-revving machines blurred the line between track and street. Riders chased power bands like they were chasing destiny. Engineers built smaller engines that screamed louder and ran hotter. Enthusiasts learned to live on the edge of grip. It was a time when two-stroke performance ruled, when agility mattered more than outright horsepower, and when one machine defined what pure, analog mastery could feel like. If that era speaks to you, or if you've ever wondered what it was like to tame a Grand Prix heart on public asphalt, you're in the right place. Like, subscribe, and comment which legend you want to see explored next. In 1996, Suzuki released the RGV250 Gamma, a motorcycle that perfectly captured the spirit of two-stroke engineering at its zenith. It was not simply another sport bike. It was a distilled expression of Grand Prix thinking translated into something that could carry a license plate. The RGV250 Gamma 1996 was a razor-edged instrument designed for riders who understood that speed was not only about numbers but about feel, timing, and precision. At its core sat a 249 cubic centimeters liquid-cooled, 90-degree V-twin engine that delivered a power band as thrilling as it was unforgiving. Those who knew how to ride it said it was like holding a scalpel. Those who did not quickly learned respect. The bike's legacy began long before 1996, tracing back to the RGV lineage that debuted in the late 1980s. Suzuki had been refining its quarter-liter weapon with each iteration, chasing lighter weight, sharper geometry, and cleaner power delivery. By the time the 1996 model arrived, it was the most polished version of that pursuit, with revised internals, improved suspension, and the kind of detail engineering that only a brand obsessed with racing could justify. The RGV250 Gamma 1996 was essentially a road-legal echo of the company's 250 cubic centimeters Grand Prix machines, sharing DNA with the bikes ridden by world champions. It was a time when riders could experience the same sensations as professional racers, even if only for a moment on a mountain pass or a short stretch of smooth tarmac. The numbers tell one story, but the experience tells another. The V-twin produced around 60 horsepower at nearly 11,000 revolutions per minute, which might sound modest today, but the Gamma weighed barely over 300 pounds. That meant explosive acceleration and a top-end rush that could leave much larger four-strokes scrambling. Suzuki's power valve system, known as SAPC, adjusted exhaust port timing electronically to spread torque across the rev range. It was one of the most sophisticated two-stroke control systems of its time. At low RPM, the bike was docile, even polite. At 8,000 revolutions per minute and beyond, it transformed into a screaming missile that demanded complete attention. This personality shift defined the RGV experience. Half patient, half predator. Every aspect of the chassis supported that dual nature. The twin-spar aluminum frame was a masterpiece of lightweight stiffness, borrowed conceptually from Suzuki's GP machines. A braced banana swing arm allowed room for the expansion chambers, while keeping the rear geometry precise and reactive. Suspension came from Showa, fully adjustable and tuned for agility rather than comfort. The front brakes were twin discs with 4-piston calipers, offering track-level stopping power that matched the bike's urgency. This was not a commuter's machine. It was an instrument for carving lines, finding apexes, and exploring the limits of balance. Riders who owned the RGV250 Gamma 1996 often described the bike as alive, but that life came at a cost. Two-stroke maintenance was an art form. Spark plugs fouled easily, oil consumption was constant, and the power band demanded precise clutch control. It was not forgiving to the inexperienced, and it punished mistakes with high side slides and melted pistons. Yet for those who respected it, the Gamma rewarded with a visceral connection that no four-stroke could match. Every blip of the throttle, every corner entry, every millimeter of lean angle carried feedback like a conversation between rider and machine. In its design philosophy, the RGV250 Gamma 1996 reflected the culture of its era. The mid-1990s represented the final peak of two-stroke sport bikes before emissions laws began to close in. Engineers poured everything they had into perfecting the format, aware that the clock was ticking. Suzuki's approach was to make the 1996 version the most balanced yet. Raw but refined, powerful yet controllable. Even the bodywork spoke of function and form working in unison, with sharp fairing lines, a wasp-like tail section, and compact dimensions that seemed to shrink around the rider. It looked fast standing still because every angle was defined by airflow and weight distribution. Owning a Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 was as much about commitment as it was about passion. These bikes required attention to detail. Oil ratios, jetting, and temperature all influenced performance. It rewarded technical understanding and punished neglect. In a way, it was a teacher. A machine that forced its owner to learn mechanical empathy. And that might be the secret to its enduring appeal. The Gamma didn't just deliver speed, it demanded involvement. Modern bikes, with their electronics and riding aids, insulate riders from mistakes. The RGV250 did the opposite. It exposed them, sharpened them, refined them. Even today, more than 2 decades later, the reputation of the RGV250 Gamma 1996 rests on its purity. Collectors seek it out not for nostalgia alone but because it represents an ideal that motorcycling has largely left behind. There is no traction control, no anti-lock braking, no power modes. Just rider, throttle, and asphalt. It remains a benchmark for lightweight performance. Proof that technology can enhance experience without diminishing it. When Suzuki built this machine, they were not chasing market share. They were chasing perfection in a category that would soon disappear. To understand the RGV250 Gamma 1996 is to understand the last gasp of two-stroke dominance. It sits at the intersection of innovation and inevitability, where engineering brilliance met environmental reality. The noise, the smell, the immediacy of the throttle, all of it signaled a type of performance that could never last. Yet for a brief moment, Suzuki managed to capture lightning in a bottle, producing a motorcycle that remains one of the purest expressions of speed ever put on the road. That is where the story begins, with a machine so finely tuned that it became both a marvel and a warning. The RGV250 Gamma 1996 was not simply built for speed. It was built to remind us what speed means when everything else is stripped away. It is the sound of ambition, the taste of oil and metal, the fleeting moment where human and machine are perfectly aligned before the future arrives to silence them. The Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 did not exist in a vacuum. It was born into a time when the sport bike world was transforming. The early 1990s were crowded with fierce competition among lightweight machines, each seeking to balance performance with accessibility. Yet the Gamma stood apart because it leaned unapologetically toward race-bred precision. Suzuki's engineers drew heavily from their 250 cubic centimeters Grand Prix program, translating concepts once reserved for professional racers into a road-going format. The result was a motorcycle that was both a teacher and a test, forcing riders to master rhythm and mechanical awareness in equal measure. At the heart of this evolution was Suzuki's unwavering belief that two-stroke technology still had room to grow. While emissions and regulation pressures mounted, the company continued to refine combustion, lubrication, and exhaust systems. The 1996 RGV250 Gamma featured a meticulously tuned version of the VJ23 engine, a 70-degree V-twin that used modern electronics to manage its temperamental nature. The power band was smoother, the throttle response sharper, and the reliability improved, at least by two-stroke standards. The SAPC ignition system dynamically adjusted timing and valve operation, allowing the Gamma to deliver torque where older models lagged. The exhaust note remained shrill and addictive, but the delivery became more predictable, making it both faster and more approachable for skilled riders. This balance of aggression and refinement defined the 1996 model. Suzuki had learned that sheer power was not enough. Control mattered more. Engineers focused on chassis stiffness, weight distribution, and suspension tuning to create a machine that cornered as if it were reading the rider's thoughts. The aluminum twin-spar frame was both lighter and stronger than before, contributing to the bike's uncanny agility. Cornering stability was phenomenal, aided by a braced banana swing arm that maintained geometry under load. The geometry itself was aggressive, designed for rapid direction changes and razor feedback. This setup demanded precision from the rider, yet rewarded every input with immediate response. Riding the RGV250 Gamma 1996 at speed was a sensory overload. The narrow seat, low clip-ons, and compact tank forced a forward stance that emphasized control. At idle, it buzzed and sputtered impatiently, waiting to be unleashed. The moment the tachometer needle surged past 8,000 revolutions per minute, the entire motorcycle seemed to awaken. The engine's frantic wail filled the air, and the front wheel flirted with levitation. Each gearshift came with a perfect rhythm, and the exhaust expelled a sharp crack that echoed Suzuki's racing pedigree. In skilled hands, it was poetry in motion. For those unprepared, it was a reminder that mastery demanded respect. Part of what made the RGV250 Gamma 1996 legendary was its accessibility to private owners who craved a taste of real racing technology. It was possible to buy parts and modifications directly influenced by Suzuki's race department. Many riders experimented with jetting kits, lightweight bodywork, and racing tires to extract every ounce of performance. The machine's inherent responsiveness made these changes noticeable, transforming every ride into an experiment in mechanical synergy. The RGV's adjustability meant that no two bikes felt exactly alike. Each rider could tailor suspension, gearing, and even power delivery to their personal style. That individuality created a bond between human and machine rarely matched by modern electronics-laden motorcycles. Yet this pursuit of purity came with challenges. The RGV250 Gamma 1996 required maintenance discipline bordering on devotion. Two-stroke oil had to be high quality. Spark plugs demanded regular inspection. Power valves needed cleaning to avoid carbon buildup. Owners who ignored these rituals often faced seized pistons or inconsistent performance. But those who embraced the maintenance learned something deeper. The Gamma was not just a machine, it was an ecosystem. Its complexity rewarded understanding, and its temperament mirrored its riders' commitment. In that way, it became more than transportation. It became partnership. Suzuki's design philosophy for the RGV250 Gamma 1996 represented the end of an era of engineering creativity unconstrained by software. Every design choice was mechanical, every solution tactile. The lightweight aluminum frame was hand-finished. The throttle cables pulled directly on carburetor slides without delay. Even the brakes transmitted pure hydraulic feedback with no intervention. Riding it connected the pilot to every element of motion, from vibration through the pegs to the subtle shifts of grip at the tire's edge. It was an education in kinetic awareness that no algorithm could replicate. In comparison to other machines of its time, the Gamma's performance seemed almost mystical. Rivals offered more displacement or comfort, but few matched its immediacy. Its responsiveness in corners made it feel telepathic, capable of reading a rider's intent before the hands and feet could fully express it. The narrow tires encouraged lean angles that seemed impossible, while the power delivery punished clumsiness. Many journalists of the era described it as the closest a road bike could come to a genuine Grand Prix racer. The praise was not exaggerated. Suzuki had effectively condensed the lessons learned on racetracks into a package small enough to fit in a garage. Still, there were contradictions at the heart of the RGV250 Gamma 1996. It was a marvel of engineering born into a world increasingly concerned with emissions and safety. Environmental regulations were tightening globally, making it clear that two-stroke engines faced extinction. Even as Suzuki perfected its masterpiece, the company knew that the category's future was limited. Four-stroke engines were becoming more efficient, and fuel injection promised cleaner combustion. The RGV represented the pinnacle of a species destined to vanish. That tension gives the 1996 model its bittersweet legacy, a triumph built in the shadow of obsolescence. Collectors and enthusiasts today often regard the RGV250 Gamma 1996 as the definitive two-stroke sport bike. Its combination of compact size, ferocious power delivery, and razor handling created a legend that continues to inspire builders and designers. Restorations and replica projects still appear around the world, celebrating its engineering purity. For younger riders accustomed to electronics and ride modes, the Gamma offers an experience that feels almost alien. One where feedback, not firmware, dictates control. Every vibration and exhaust pulse becomes part of the communication loop between rider and machine. From a cultural standpoint, the RGV250 Gamma 1996 embodies the passion of the 1990s sport bike scene. It symbolizes a generation that valued hands-on tuning, garage craftsmanship, and a direct connection to performance. Riders of that era remember the smell of two-stroke oil and the anticipation of hitting the power band as rites of passage. The Gamma captured that emotion perfectly. It was not a product designed for mass appeal. It was a love letter to speed written in aluminum and oil. Even decades later, that letter remains legible every time the engine fires and the blue haze curls into the air. The Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 carried forward a legacy that could not survive the changing tide of technology and regulation, but its influence continues to ripple through the motorcycling world. As the final and most advanced iteration of Suzuki's two-stroke lineage, it represented everything engineers could accomplish when their sole purpose was to chase speed without compromise. By 1996, Suzuki's race-derived principles had been distilled to perfection. Precision fueling, lightweight materials, and geometry so tight that every movement translated into motion. Yet that level of purity came at a cost. The world was turning toward cleaner engines, smoother power delivery, and systems that made riding more accessible. The Gamma's brilliance, ironically, became its undoing. When the RGV250 Gamma 1996 was released, few realized it would be the swan song of its kind. Regulations in Europe and Japan began tightening almost immediately after its debut, forcing manufacturers to retire or heavily modify their two-stroke offerings. Suzuki's engineers knew the writing was on the wall. The RGV's 249 cubic centimeters V-twin could not coexist with stricter emissions limits without sacrificing the very characteristics that made it special. The high compression burn, the sharp exhaust timing, the smell of premix, it all became incompatible with the direction the industry was heading. In that sense, the RGV250 was not just a machine, it was a farewell performance. For those who experienced the Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 firsthand, the memory often stays vivid decades later. The rush of power as the revs climbed past 9,000 revolutions per minute, the sense of total control as the chassis carved through a corner, the sound that echoed across empty roads, all of it became an imprint on the rider's memory. It was not just about going fast. It was about existing in a state of perfect focus where nothing else mattered. The Gamma demanded that attention. Every mistake, every shift, every degree of throttle input carried meaning. It was mechanical meditation at 100 miles per hour. Collectors and restorers today treat the RGV250 Gamma 1996 with reverence. Original examples have become prized possessions, often displayed like works of kinetic art. The details that once seemed ordinary, machined aluminum, polished welds, the subtle curve of the swing arm, now stand as testaments to an era of craftsmanship. Enthusiasts scour the globe for factory parts, preserving these machines not only for their value but for what they represent. A time when motorcycles were still unapologetically analog. Even modified examples, equipped with upgraded suspension or tuned exhausts, retain the spirit of the original. They remind us that this machine was never about luxury or convenience. It was about raw connection. The mechanical complexity of the Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 mirrored the emotional complexity of its appeal. It was temperamental, expensive to maintain, and demanding to ride well, yet those very traits created its mythology. Owning one meant accepting imperfection and embracing effort. It required commitment, and that commitment deepened the experience. In an age where motorcycles are increasingly automated, the Gamma's quirks feel like a badge of authenticity. Riders who have transitioned from modern superbikes often describe the Gamma as both humbling and enlightening. It refuses to flatter incompetence. Instead, it refines it. That is what makes it timeless. The broader impact of the RGV250 Gamma 1996 extends beyond nostalgia. Its engineering principles influenced later generations of performance motorcycles. The emphasis on central mass, short wheelbase, and suspension feedback became cornerstones of sport bike design. Even as manufacturers moved to four-stroke engines, the lessons learned from two-stroke dynamics continued to shape how power and weight were managed. The concept of a lightweight, rider-focused machine did not die with the Gamma. It evolved, echoing through modern designs that prioritize agility over brute force. In that way, the spirit of the RGV lives on, even in motorcycles that share none of its mechanical DNA. Culturally, the RGV250 Gamma 1996 captured the end of innocence in motorcycling. The 1990s were an age of transition, when analog technology reached its apex just before digital systems took over. The Gamma stood at that crossroads, representing a philosophy that valued feel over figures, craftsmanship over computation. Riders who came of age during that time often see it as the last true connection to the roots of motorcycling, when skill-defined outcome and performance could still surprise you. Every time its two-stroke engine screamed to redline, it was like hearing the final words of a language that would soon fall silent. For Suzuki, the RGV250 Gamma 1996 marked both a culmination and a turning point. The company redirected its efforts toward developing four-stroke sport bikes like the GSX-R series, which would dominate the following decades. But even as that transition occurred, the memory of the Gamma lingered in the design studio and the test track. Its precision, weight distribution, and responsiveness informed how Suzuki approached handling in larger displacement machines. The lessons learned from that compact 249 cubic centimeters twin became part of Suzuki's DNA, influencing generations of motorcycles that followed. Among riders, the Gamma also became a cultural symbol, a handshake between eras. It connected the home mechanic with the factory racer, the dreamer with the engineer. Its existence validated the idea that performance could be intimate, that speed could be personal rather than purely statistical. Every restoration, every engine rebuild, every carefully mixed tank of two-stroke oil is an act of preservation, not just of a machine but of a mindset. To keep a Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 alive today is to keep alive the belief that true performance is not defined by convenience or compliance, but by clarity of purpose. Even in the age of electric motorcycles and digital dashboards, the Gamma's reputation endures. It continues to appear in documentaries, collector shows, and rider forums as a benchmark for purity. Younger enthusiasts who never lived through its era often discover it online, fascinated by a time when riders tuned carburetors by ear and judged performance by feel. To them, the RGV250 Gamma 1996 is not a relic but a revelation. A reminder that progress does not always mean improvement. Sometimes it means remembering what made the experience special in the first place. The story of the Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 is therefore not just about a motorcycle. It is about an attitude. It is about precision, imperfection, and passion coexisting in harmony. It is about the pursuit of mastery in a form that no longer fits the modern world but still inspires it. Long after its engine falls silent, the lessons it taught continue to resonate. Its influence can be felt every time a rider chooses control over comfort, skill over software, and sensation over simulation. The Gamma may have been the last of its breed, but its spirit rides on. The Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 remains a monument to an age when performance meant more than horsepower figures and electronics. It stood for purity. It stood for skill. It stood for the bond between rider and machine. Looking back now, it is easy to see why this motorcycle earned its legend. It was born from the same racing DNA that carried Suzuki's Grand Prix machines to victory, yet it was refined enough to exist in the real world. The RGV250 Gamma 1996 was not built to impress with luxury or comfort. It was built to communicate. Every vibration, every twitch of the throttle, every wail from the expansion chambers told a story about motion and control. That honesty has become rare. Modern sport bikes filter experience through traction control, quick shifters, and adjustable ride modes. These technologies enhance safety and consistency, but they also mute the language that motorcycles once spoke fluently. The Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996, by contrast, demanded fluency. It did not correct mistakes. It revealed them. It asked the rider to meet it on its own terms, to develop sensitivity and timing that only practice could refine. That challenge forged a generation of riders who learned to feel what the machine wanted, not just command it. In that sense, the Gamma was less a motorcycle and more a mentor. As time has passed, appreciation for the RGV250 Gamma 1996 has grown beyond nostalgia. Collectors prize its mechanical artistry, restorers seek to keep its legacy authentic, and riders continue to measure modern bikes against its standard for responsiveness. It is not only the engine or frame that makes it iconic, but the philosophy behind its creation. Suzuki built it in defiance of compromise, aware that its time was limited but determined to make its final statement count. That clarity of intent turned a production motorcycle into a cultural artifact. The lessons it leaves behind extend beyond motorcycling. The RGV250 Gamma 1996 reminds us that progress should not always mean removing difficulty. Sometimes, challenge is the source of reward. The effort it took to maintain, tune, and master the Gamma made the experience richer, not harder. It turned performance into participation. In a world where convenience often dominates design, the Gamma's story feels like a reminder that friction, the struggle, the learning curve, is part of what makes achievement meaningful. Today, the few surviving examples of the Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 are more than collectibles. They are symbols of a moment when technology served human ability, not the other way around. Their engines still sing the same song that once echoed through mountain passes and racetracks, a sound both haunting and inspiring. The smoke may clear quickly, but the memory lingers. Riders who experience it understand that what they are hearing is not just exhaust noise. It is history speaking through metal and motion. So the next time someone asks why a 250 cubic centimeters two-stroke from the 1990s still captures hearts in a world of superbikes and electric torque, the answer is simple. Because it represents everything real about riding. Because it was built by people who believed perfection was not a feature, but a feeling. Because the Suzuki RGV250 Gamma 1996 was, and remains, the purest expression of what performance can be when passion is the only goal.